CTBK gives executives and owners of mid-market businesses unparalleled confidence and clarity so you can focus on strategic objectives and organizational success. Their multidisciplinary advisors, accountants, and team members have a wealth of experience and are all available and responsive to each client to ensure the most effective advice, actions, and outcomes no matter the situation or complexity level. That experience base and one-team approach, combined with integrated and efficient way of operating, enable them to be truly proactive partners, doing the best thing for their client every time. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK can work for you.
Hi, this is Josh Reed, Sports Director at WIVB Channel 4 in Buffalo, and you are listening to the Tim Graham and Friends podcast.
What are you doing?
Tim's been bothering me to do this thing for his podcast. Sorry. I gotta stop this, I guess.
Welcome to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with my co-host Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Sports Plus, and also joined for this episode by the Associated Press's John Wawrow. And we're going to get into Bills, Sabres, local college basketball. And the reason we're going to get into local college basketball is because once you get into the rankings, you earn Associated Press coverage. And so we're going to talk about St. Bonaventure men and UB women, and are they going to be able to crack the top 25 and start getting that national coverage from the Associated Press, and all the things that go into that. It's also just a good way to talk about local hoops and the state of it and where things are with all the different programs. But I don't know how much we need to get into Bills versus Patriots in Foxborough on Sunday. It's a meaningless game for the Bills. I guess probably it's meaningless for the Patriots too in terms of anything but draft position. And Gerard Mayo says he's going to try to win the game, which of course they will. Drake May is going to start and play and all that good stuff.
Mike White
has been signed from the practice squad, not just elevated. He's been signed from the practice squad. So the Bills may give him a lot of run. And of course, you also don't want, even if Mitch Trubisky was going to get a lot of the playing time, you don't want Josh Allen to have to be the guy who comes in case something happens to Mitch Trubisky. But yeah, Mike White might see a lot of action. But let's talk about the Bills and their first round playoff matchup. The possibilities are Denver, Miami, Cincinnati. I think that the fear out there among Bills fans is Cincinnati in the first round because Joe Burrow is otherworldly, and if not for 8 losses and being on the cusp of elimination for the past month, is probably the MVP favorite, and not Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson because of those numbers, those gaudy numbers that Joe Burrow is putting up. And then the Dolphins, the sentiment that it's difficult to beat anybody 3 times in the same season, which I think is bullshit. I mean, if you're the better team, you're the better team. The Bills have beaten Miami 3 times in the same season before. The Patriots used to do it all the time when they'd win 2 games in the regular season and then get in the playoffs and beat whatever team, whether it was Miami or the Jets might sneak into the playoffs back during Tom Brady's days. And I don't know, Denver is the better team all season. And yet that seems to be the public sentiment is that they'd rather see Denver. I don't know. What do you guys think? Who should the Bills want to face?
Well, I think facing Denver should not be an issue because you've got Bo Nix, who has had a very good rookie season. But he's a rookie quarterback going into the playoffs. And yes, they've got a very good defense, but I just think they're a little bit one-dimensional. They really haven't developed a running attack from what I've seen from them. They rely a lot on Bo, and a one-dimensional team is a team that the Bills is very much a team the Bills can beat up on. I actually prefer Cincinnati. If this is their Super Bowl run, and I'm saying stressing if, I'd love to see Cincinnati, Baltimore, and Kansas City all lined up in a row. Why not?
Yeah, but then maybe it doesn't become their Super Bowl run if there's
Well,
three
fine,
that
but
they get in a
right.
row.
I'd like
Sometimes
if
you need the schedule to break in your favor, and you need maybe a softer matchup when you're not getting that first round bye. Uh, Jonah, what's your pick if you had
Well,
to pick one?
I think my pick might be different than the Bills fan pick. I think, kind of like John's saying, the Bills fans are probably nervous about it being the Bengals because it's only been 2 years since the Bengals came here and won a divisional playoff game by a rather wide margin. And Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and how good that offense is. It seems like even though the Bills are probably favored in that game, it won't be an easy time. I think it's going to be Denver because Kansas City is going to sit their starters and Patrick Mahomes, and it seems like the team that wants to win that game more will win that game, and that's the team that Denver is going to get that spot. But as the AP stringer that covers the visiting locker room, I think Cincinnati's the better storyline and the more interesting matchup. And from the national perspective of television, I think that's a game that everybody would maybe much rather see than Bills Broncos. And Miami, it seems like that's a game that the Bills and their fans don't have to worry about because the Bills have beaten Miami so many times over the years, and had a playoff game not that long ago where it was the same situation, and in the cold weather, Tua being injured, it just doesn't seem like Miami can come up here and win. But Miami played here really tough earlier in the season. I feel like there's something about that matchup where Miami's on the verge of getting one back on the Bills. They play so many times. They've had some close games, and I just don't know if the Bills can, if any team can just win and win and win against an opponent, a division opponent over and over and over again. But I just don't see the trajectory in the Dolphins season of them being able to come in and win a wild card game on the road against one of the top four teams in the NFL. I mean, the Bills being where they are, shouldn't really be worried about anybody. A Super Bowl championship team or Super Bowl contending team shouldn't be at all concerned about their first round wild card playoff game at home. That should actually sort of be almost like that New England game a couple of years ago where you just prove how good you are. And the margin of victory is almost what they're playing for than actually having to pull out the win and make it an interesting game for the AP and the AP stringers.
I I mean, I really think that this is a season in which this team is motivated to not erase, but overcome its reputation over of playoff failures. There seems to be a motivation. This team seems motivated and seems to be on the upswing. I I totally get the Rams loss because I saw it coming after an emotional win over San Francisco, in which they're doing snow angels. But I love the way they responded in beating Detroit. Yes, the defense struggled at times, but the way the Bills came out in that game, the defense shutting out, forcing two punts, and Allen leading two touchdown drives showed me that this is a team that knows how it can win and what it takes to win. And I think the two losses in Baltimore and Houston also taught them a few things. I really think the Bills are, to me, are odds on, are even favorites to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. From what I've seen from their growth this year and the way Josh Allen is playing, I would not discount him from being from putting that cape on and being that Superman guy. Maybe I'm a homer, but I'm just from what I'm reading, this is different than 2023. This is different than 2022. And there's a lot I'm intrigued about this team that I want to see play out in the postseason.
And I think it's noteworthy and probably maybe the strength of this podcast, and especially when you have, I'm talking about John Wawrow being a guest on this particular episode of the podcast. I'm not saying about this podcast in general, but you have three guys who've been in the locker rooms a lot. Bills, Sabres, whatever, in your previous incarnations, John with the Grizzlies and me with the the Las Vegas Thunder of the International Hockey League or whatever, UNLV football. Well, then I guess three years covering the AFC East for ESPN counts for something. But this locker room does feel different, and I've not covered, unless you want to count when I was at ESPN, I've not covered a champion. I've not been a beat writer with a team all season and covered a championship, whether it be the Sabres, who the closest they got were back-to-back Eastern Conference Finals appearances, and then, the Bills reaching the AFC Championship game, and then 13 seconds, and then kind of taking steps back in recent years of not getting or reaching the golden ring. So I guess I can't speak as an expert of what a championship team looks like or feels like. But I will say that this has been an incredibly impressive mix. And I'm not saying it's because of Stephon Diggs or Gabriel Davis, you subtracted a lot of leadership, a lot of respected dudes. Mitch Morse, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde for almost the entire season. Now he's back recently, but you've subtracted a lot of guys that were looked up to in that locker room. Even Gabriel Davis, he was voted a captain at least. That's not nothing. But whatever it is from a chemistry standpoint, John, you even wrote about it that Haley Steinfeld might even have some impact on Josh Allen. And that's what some of the teammates think, that they've settled him down, that she's settled him down a little bit. But there is something different and palpable about this team that is just pretty amazing. And they are loose, but they don't seem too loose. I do think they got maybe a little loose with that Rams game, but hey, the Rams are a good team. The Rams are a division champion. They kind of backed into it, but the Rams are a good team. The Bills going on the road in between games against San Francisco and Detroit. That was kind of one of those, that was one of those games where they could get nipped, and they did. And the offense played a near perfect game. It did. Right. Maybe you could even argue it was a perfect game, and they lost it. The game against the Patriots, maybe they got a little fuzzy in that one too, and then come back. And the Jets game, as insignificant as of a matchup as it was, what the Bills did was still, I thought, remarkable. That's what you're supposed to do to a team that's on the ropes, and the Bills flexed it, and they had backups playing a lot of the game, and they still, that was what you're supposed to look like. But anyways, I know that, and I'm kind of reaching here because it is an undefinable trait or characteristic about a team. The word vibe gets used way too much, but it is there. I feel like this is something that is not common. And these guys, and Sean McDermott's evolution as a personable human being, he's not untouchable head coach anymore. When I did my story on the Bills or Buffalo and Detroit, heading into that game and the similarities between the two towns. And I reached out to John Beilein, from Newport and Canisius College head coach, who went on and coached at Michigan, now works for the Detroit Pistons. The guy's worked in both markets. And anyways, he was talking about Sean McDermott and how he used to reach out. They used to send each other motivational texts and things like that. And he asked me how Sean was doing. And one of the things I said was, he's a lot looser than he used to be. And Beilein, without even missing a beat, says that's because his program is in place and it's running itself.
I love that quote. I remember reading that quote. I love that quote.
Yeah. And so that was Beilein as the decades-long coach, recognizing he doesn't have to be on everything at all times anymore. He doesn't have to be a micromanager to make sure his culture is just so that it's the feather and the building the nest, that this feather is in just the right place and this bit of twine is in the right place. It's there and it's whole, and the coaches and the players are running it, and he can be himself. And it took us 7 years maybe to see the real Sean McDermott, or maybe this wasn't never the Sean McDermott. Maybe this is part of the evolution of a human being. And when you have your culture and and you are a leader for the first time as a head coach, a first-time head coach, maybe it does take 7 years to become the person as part of your journey that you were going to be. But I think I just think the whole thing, the aura of this team is something, and something significant.
Well, and it corresponds with Josh Allen's first year of having to be the leader. He's been the leader, but the de facto leader without the Micah Hydes, without the Kyle Williams.
Not just because he's the quarterback.
Correct. He's had to take a lot on his shoulders, and he's accepted that. And I'm impressed in the way and how he's matured over the years and over time. And hey, God bless him. Haley Steinfeld should have won an Oscar for True Grit, but if she is part of that maturity, that evolution where he feels comfortable, he told me she's his biggest fan. She gives him a hug no matter what, and that's important when you go home after a tough loss, say after what happened in Houston, or what happened in against the Rams. So I think that's part of it too. That he's reached a level of maturity, that he is comfortable with who he is and comfortable with being a leader. But all of this corresponds at a time when the Bills shouldn't be doing this, and yet you've got Sean McDermott and Josh Allen, the two most important people on this franchise, aside from Brandon Beane, of course, finding some sense of comfort. I don't want to go too long on this, but I mean, Wednesday on New Year's, it was around 4 o'clock, and there was maybe about five of us left in the media room. And all of a sudden, Sean McDermott popped his head in and asked, "What the heck we're doing there? Shouldn't we be celebrating New Year's?" Well, this is what Wednesdays are like, we said. And Sean really didn't say much, but we had a quick little interjection. But I never remember Sean McDermott popping his head into the media room on any day unless there was something of high alert.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all great stuff for telling the story of the Bills team and how they've gotten to this point and how good of a season it's been. I think it's been one of the most fun and enjoyable seasons for people following the Bills, and also within the Bills. There's been a real lack of off the field issues or bickering Bills type issues and things like that, on top of a lot of good wins and memorable plays and exciting national television games and all that. But as you get along in the playoffs, you're facing other teams that have a lot of good vibes and a lot of good aura and magical season runs and feeling like they have the momentum behind them. And it's really going to come down to who's the best football team, who's the healthiest football team, a little bit of luck thrown into that. And I think the problem potentially for the Bills is, if you believe that defense wins championships, I don't know if they've had a championship level defense for most of the season. They looked that way against the Jets, but I think that might have said more about the Jets than the Bills. And especially in that game against the Ravens, I don't know if it's going to go that way again, particularly if it's a home game for the Bills, but that looked like a really bad matchup for the Bills. They've struggled to stop the run in a lot of games, and this is maybe the best running team in football, or one of the best running teams in the AFC. And if they get through that one and they get to the Chiefs have a different kind of vibe. It's not maybe as feel good, and there's been some concern about the fact that they can't score 30 points and they haven't won any blowout type games, but their vibe is that they always win in the fourth quarter. Now, the Bills broke through that with their game at home, but how many times have you've seen it with the Bills and the Chiefs, but I think you see it in every sport every year, where there is a matchup like that in the regular season that you think kind of tells you how it's going to go in the postseason. And then you see the better team, raise their level of play and pull that out in the playoff rematch. And I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but if it did happen, I don't think there's going to be any surprise if you see the Chiefs pull one of those fourth quarter games and win it at the end against the Bills, like they've done to every other team. And, I think the Bills have a lot going for them, but I think we can all agree that they've, in some ways, overachieved from what any of our expectations were going into the season, with the way they redid the roster and how they stacked up against other teams. And teams that overachieve in the regular season sometimes find their level in the playoffs. I don't know if that means the Bills are going to play that much poorly, but just the matchup of going up against another playoff team might show some flaws in this Bills team that we haven't really seen in several weeks.
I just want
to. Is overachieving the right word?
I mean, maybe it's the wrong word, but I think it's the vibe of the season. I think they've had a better season than many people thought they could have, or even some of the most optimistic Bills fans were hoping for. I think this was thought to be a bit of a reset season. I think there was a lot of belief that they go as far as Josh Allen takes them, and Josh Allen being MVP caliber has taken them to be one of the very best teams in the league. But I don't think it definitely wasn't a team coming into the season that there was as much hype about and as much belief in as the last 2 or 3 Bills teams. It just seemed like, and maybe they've proven all of us wrong, but it does seem like they played a little bit above the level that on paper they looked like going into the season.
I personally think we underestimated a lot of things, and that was and I'll start with me with the everybody eats mantra. I mean, it took them a long time to finally figure for that receiver group to shake out. But aside from that, I think we underestimated the running attack and how much Joe Brady was going to succeed with this balanced attack, because it's something we've not seen here with a successful team since Thurman Thomas days. And when I say successful, LaShawn McCoy ran for a lot, but they certainly didn't pass for a lot. That wasn't balance. That was necessity. Now they've got balance, which I think a lot of us, okay, not a lot of us, but I'll just start with me, didn't see coming.
Yeah, the offensive line's been great, running the ball and protecting Josh Allen. He's the least sacked quarterback in the league, and they've been healthy, and you really have no concerns, I think, in any of those 5 spots. But that's why the Bills have one of the best records in the league and, atop all the different power rankings and analytical systems. I mean, I think you got to be concerned about, injuries at linebacker and some of the vulnerabilities on defense. And Tim's been saying all year that the kicker is going to lose him a game, and it hasn't happened yet, but, it could happen in the playoffs.
It's a weakness.
It is
a weakness. Well, it's a question mark. I guess it doesn't necessarily become a weakness until it happens, but it does seem to be I don't think that the Bills are nearly as confident when they send their kicker out there as they were in years past with the same kicker.
I agree.
I think that's my point, that there were things to be concerned about with the Bills this season, and they seem to have responded to all that and quieted the concerns, but they could lose a postseason game for some of the reasons that were concerning going into the season. And I think you look back at the whole season as a whole after that and say, there was a reason why we didn't think this was the very best version of the Bills coming into the year.
Yeah, I just a couple of points that were made while you guys were talking there. I just to button up the discussion about maturity and home life and things like that. I'm not saying it's the reason why. I don't think that it's a direct correlation, but I do recall that during the NHL lockout back in 04-05, about half the Sabres roster had children, and many of them were their first kids, and we're talking about key players. And I don't, I also recall Chris Drury having a really difficult time while his wife was pregnant, especially on a road trip. There are all kinds and then his wife had the baby and he started playing better again. There is something to say. I mean, people might roll their eyes about home life being important because everybody has their own version of home life that they can fall back on as a fan or a member of the media and say, it's just why do these guys deserve credit for having a home life? I have a home life. I doesn't make me a millionaire or whatever it is, but these things do matter.
I do think if being a first-time father is a big factor, then I would put all my money on the Dolphins and Tyreek Hill to be Super Bowl contenders.
He can only be a first-time father once.
I think he did it 9 times this year, though.
No, he made 9 first-time mothers, I think is what it was. That's different. Okay. Or whatever that number is. Then the other thing, to Jonah's point about teams in having the vibe, I'll disagree. I think maybe when you get to the conference championship game, you're playing a team that's got a good vibe, but the Bills, the 3 possible opponents that they have are facing big organizational concerns. Now, Denver, of course, they're a team on the rise. They're maybe a little bit different, but the Dolphins, there's talk there of, does their general manager deserve to be brought back, and all the different things, all the different moves that have been made, and Tua and his injury history and all the stuff swirling around that organization's future. And the Bengals, Joe Burrow just a few days ago was talking about, lobbying for the Bengals to re-sign their best players. And that organization seems to be falling apart a little bit because they had so much, they expected so much of their team this year, and they're now 8-8 and on the verge of not making the postseason. So, yeah, I agree to you. I agree with you, Jonah, but not maybe the first couple of runs. There are a lot of teams that make the playoffs that don't know whether they're coming or going. Are they on the upswing or the downward descent? The Sabres.
Good thing we weren't going to talk a lot about the Bills today.
Right. We were just going to touch on it. Oh, one last thing here, but before we move on to the Sabres, Matt Milano, how much should he play on Sunday in Foxborough? Because here's a guy that you want to preserve him, but the version of Matt Milano that we've seen since he's been back, and he's still, I think, trying to get trust and have, full faith in his recovery, his restructured leg. He didn't get many quality reps on the leg to feel confident in that. And then he's got the biceps and the groin and all. So do you want him out there working towards being playoff ready or playoff caliber, or do you want to save him for the playoffs?
Great question. I the most a quarter, 2 series perhaps. I don't know if I'd want to sit him. He showed some good flashes against the Jets. I thought there was some encouragement there. But if that groin if there's any question about that groin, that prevented him from playing a couple of weeks back, I would sit him. But if he needs 2 series and it feels like he can go for 2 series, then I'd put him in. But I'd be very careful with Matt Milano. I know he's not been around, but I think he's going to be a very important cog, a much more important cog to that defense. This time around than when he was missing last year. And I think we learned what the team missed last year without Matt Milano.
Yeah, and the Bills are thin at linebacker. Terrell Bernard's not going to play, and Nicholas Morrow was just released. They probably can get away with, sitting Matt Milano early in the game, but they don't have a lot of bodies to go to in that situation. So I think he has to be active. I wouldn't play him very much just because he's just injured a lot of different body parts in the last few games that he's played and even in practice. And it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to get hurt again, but I think you got to be concerned that too many snaps are too many exposures to another injury, even if it's a minor one, that, reduces his effectiveness in the playoffs.
Great points. The Buffalo Sabres lost another tough one last night in Denver. I will say that I did glance at the odds of a Avalanche win late in the second period when the Sabres were up 2 goals, and I thought that FanDuel was being very generous. If you were to put a bet on the money line for Colorado to win that game, because it was in Denver, clearly superior team. I mean, even watching the Sabres get up last night, by a couple of goals at a couple of different times. Colorado, the speed, the skill, the passing, the power. When they're on the power play, it's like, man, it doesn't even look like the same league. The Sabres but somehow, as they did when they played the Avalanche in KeyBank Center, got a big lead. So is there a great shame in giving up a lead to a team as talented as Denver? Probably not in a one-off or in a vacuum. But as part of one more game, as just a 1-point game instead of a 2-point game. And again, it's dangerous, I think, to look at one game, but it's where we are with this team. I think a lot of Sabres fans are hate watching the team. I think a lot of Sabres fans who I speak with are kind of rooting for them to lose, which is, bad for your brand. It's not like the Tank where they're rooting for him. They're rooting for him to lose because they think it's the only way that they're going to be able to get rid of Kevin Adams or change Terry Pagula's mind to do something different, is if he's forced into it through humiliation. It's a bad place to be for an organization, but guys, you cover the Sabres way more than I do. You're in the dressing room. And you don't step on the logo for sure.
Why not? Let's do that. Let's start that. I mean, let's start walking on the logo, because they're certainly not doing anything, to make that logo look lustrous. I mean, this is a team that should be embarrassed by itself, for itself, because we come off this off season in which everybody's, like last season, we need accountability. That's the thing. We need accountability. Well, they bring in Lindy Ruff. Lindy Ruff can hold guys accountable to some degree, but he doesn't have a general manager that will make any moves or punish guys by making them accountable. But yet we still get back to a team that can't win more than 3 games in a row, that goes through remarkable lapses of play for extended periods of time and blows leads and is now blowing leads, which is something it didn't do under Don Granato. It's an embarrassment, and maybe you're right. Like I was joking there, but maybe let's start walking on the logo because there's no respect for it in that room.
Yeah,
There.
well, as Tim
That's my
mentioned,
I fueled Jerry Sullivan there.
as Tim mentioned, there's probably no shame in losing an overtime game on the road against the Colorado Avalanche, but because of the loss they had at home last month against the Colorado Avalanche and the repeating of the same storyline and the same mistakes, if they had lost 3-0, it probably wouldn't be as bad as the way they lost last night. And it seemed like they had, avenged that loss. When Jason Zucker scored that goal with about 4 minutes left and they're up 5-3, I mean, I wrote a 300-word story that basically said Sabres, withstand the Avalanche this time, and they didn't make the same mistakes, and they pushed back, and they won the game, and that could have really...
was a huge. You're right, Jonah, and I guess I didn't, but you're right. That was a huge goal. That was a case closed goal. Should have been for most teams. That's a game over goal right there, and that's where you're right. Where it's got to hurt walking back into that dressing room with a loss after Jason Zucker scores that goal. When he did, hat trick, the whole thing.
And even Zach Benson's goal earlier in the third period seemed like the Sabres were conscious of not letting this happen again against the Colorado Avalanche. And even if they maybe lost the game, they were going to go down swinging. And they did that up until those last 3 minutes when Colorado pulled the goaltender and went 6-on-5. And then all of a sudden the Sabres seemed to be playing not to lose, and Colorado had all the confidence, but you think there's really just not enough time left in the game for Colorado to do this, but they did do it. And then the Sabres seemed to be coming out shell-shocked in overtime. And you go from a situation where the Sabres would have won, 4 and 5 games coming off that 13-game winless streak, and you think they're probably not going to make the playoffs, but turning around the vibes and the narrative of the season and getting the fans back on their side. And now they're back into that sunken place. And that's, I think, the biggest problem is when they lost to Colorado at home, it really seemed to snowball and affect their confidence and their level of play and belief going several games after that. And if that happens again, it only can get worse. So the Sabres really need to respond from that game, and if not win, play well. They probably do need to win this game in Vegas so they don't come home on another losing streak and another, opportunity to just have the fans wearing paper bags to the arena and booing the team. If they can win this game in Vegas Saturday night, I think it changes a lot of, the feeling about the team, even if it doesn't change very much about where they are in the standings and where they're going.
Is it don't they have another road game? Is there another one in there too?
Well, Monday,
no, I'm sorry.
They're home against Washington on Monday, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, I thought they still had one more game on the 4-game road trip, but I'm forgetting the St. Louis.
And just the weird things that keep affecting the Sabres. They knock a goalie out, they chase a goalie out of the game, and they're worse against the replacement goalie. And earlier in the season, they struggled in these 6-on-5 situations, and they worked on it in practice. And Lindy Ruff said they were trying to solve that. And then, last night they lose the game in that type of situation again. They're just repeating the same mistakes and the same ghosts haunting them game after game and getting worse in some situations.
There's no core there. We talked about, there's no leadership core there. They have leaders apparently because they're wearing C's and A's, but there's really no. We talked about the vibe or the feel that we had of the Bills room, and I always look back to the vibe and the feel of the Sabres room with Chris Drury, Danny Briere, and Ryan Miller in the same room. And you walked into that room in 2005 and go, you felt something. There was something that you felt, that there was something different. I walk in the Sabres room and there's nothing different except there's some different names above the lockers, above the stalls. Jason Zucker is playing. Jason Zucker should be an example to Kevin Adams as to what this team needs. And yet He brought in Jason Zucker, and yes, Malenstein and they've been okay. But this is why you bring outside guys in, because Jason Zucker gets it. He's desperate. He's playing on a contract, and he's looking to cash in and he's hoping to be traded. I'm sure. I'm guessing here. At the trade deadline, because then he's done his he's done his penance and gets
right.
to go.
He's this year's Kyle Okposo.
Yeah, and he gets to go someplace else and win. But this is why the Sabres need more Jason Zuckers, because I like talking to Jason Zucker. There's a lot of guys that I have no business talking to, because I keep hearing the same thing. They're as lost as they look like they are on the ice mentally, I think. And that's why something was needed to stop that during the 13-game skid. Kevin Adams sat on his hands and hoping for something different to happen with essentially the same team. Yes, there's been changes, but the core that I speak to that's supposed to be there, it's there, but it's not.
How have you found the locker room, Jonah?
The same as John, and
the
last time I was there, I was in the visiting locker room. The vibe's not good. I think even Jason Zucker seems to be struggling to explain the losses. I mean, and then when the Sabres won, the vibe was great. Alex Tuck's really the guy that's standing up there and trying to explain why this team's losing night after night. And I think he was really grasping for explanations as that winless streak extended. And then I kind of liked his vibe and the things he said after they won the game. I think Lindy Ruff is a lot more direct in explaining why the Sabres lose and summing up the moments. And he seems to be taking the losses hard. You feel bad for him in a way, because I think some of the buttons he's pushing are the right moves. He puts Tage Thompson on the wing on the top line last night, and some of those were power play goals, but he gets assists on all three of Zucker's goals, and it seems like that was a good move. But it doesn't make them any better on defense or any better at protecting that lead late. Yeah, the vibe's terrible. I mean, they did win the last home game I was at, so it was a little bit better. But yeah, there's really, and they lack the older players that can put things into perspective. And with us, we don't know what the vibe is like in the locker room when we're not in there. And you're only, as you noticed last year, there's only 2 or 3 guys in that locker room that are talking after the game, and everybody else is in that back locker room that we're not into. But you just think that this team lacks the older veteran players that can say the right things to their teammates and get them out of these lulls. And yeah, I mean, I think Rasmus Dahlin's an excellent player, but he seems to be lacking something as a captain at this point in his career. And, maybe the Sabres don't miss Kyle Okposo on the ice, but they seem to, I think, miss his captain influence, although it's not like they won a ton of games last year with him as the captain either.
It popped into my head, and I want to ask you guys before I forget. Jonah, were you there for Sean McDermott on Wednesday?
I was not. No.
Okay.
John was there. UB women's basketball.
I was there.
I was not there because I needed to interview players, and sometimes I will time my arrival to Bill's practice for the locker room as opposed to being there all day, including Sean McDermott. We all saw the clip. Matt Beauvais posted it on Twitter. And Joan, I'll ask you, didn't have to be there to have an opinion on it. Oh. What is your thought on Sean McDermott mentioning the palm trees? I don't.
Go on.
You think it was an accident?
Yeah, I think it was an accident, because if you take the full context of the clip, he's reminiscing about playing in Miami. Now, maybe there was a little bit of a trying to be funny. Sean McDermott is not funny. And sometimes when he tries to be funny, it comes out awkwardly. He had a weird reference to airplanes last week that yes. I don't think he should have said.
By the way, I think that he was catching himself. I don't think he was making fun of himself about the 9/11 anecdote. Yeah. I think it was because Deion Dawkins had a plane crash in his yard. But sure. A lot of people overlooked
not something to joke about in any way. It was not a line he should have put out there. And which is why I don't think there was any intention to make a palm tree reference. Maybe it slipped out, but I don't think Kevin Adams wasn't the first Buffalo sports figure to probably use palm trees in some kind of an analogy. It's something people kind of say about comparing the weather here and climates elsewhere. But it did, whether he intended to or not, it came across that way. It kind of felt like, Sean McDermott's dunking on Kevin Adams there, and it was maybe spun that way in the media and Twitter and the fan reaction to it. And I think it's interesting because I think in a lot of ways, I would agree with the Sabres' belief that Kevin Adams' statement was somewhat taken out of context by maybe the Twitter sphere and the emotional reaction to it, and not really taking the full breadth of what he was trying to say. And it was a bit of a side comment in the middle of trying to say that winning is what they really need to do to change the culture. And he made some comparisons to the Bills when doing that. And it's just kind of interesting that it happened in a different statement, in a different type of way, but that it happens the other way, that, the Twitter clip without the full context just, dunks on the Sabres again.
What makes me wonder, two things. Number one, we've been exposed to Sean McDermott for, is this his eighth year?
Yes.
Seventh year, whatever, eighth year, his eighth season. In the past, there have been times when he said something and it caught fire and they didn't think, and what would they do? They'll poke their head back in. They'll get us coming when at practice, they've seen, and it'll be like, hey, look, that was not, and there'll be some sort of clarification. There wasn't that. And I'm not saying that has to have happened for, for this not to have been a mistake. But the other thing too, is that we do know that Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott in particular have been crazily defensive about Buffalo and what they've built in terms of the Bills being a destination. And whether it be, I'm drawing a blank, the Steelers receiver, Antonio Brown stuff, or all these different things, people push. Brandon Beane is quick to push back on anything negative about Takeo Spikes and the tweeting about where the alumni sit. Brandon Beane was upset about that. Anything that has to do with making Buffalo less than, they are quick. And so that's why I thought that maybe this might have been on Sean McDermott's radar, because the general manager of their hockey team, won Buffalo, etc. You don't want it to get out there that this place sucks. So you have one organization that embraces where else would you rather be than right here, right now, versus the hockey team owned by the same people saying nobody wants to be here now. Nobody wants to be here now. Or there's all kinds of places people would rather be than right here, right now. And so anyway, that's why I wonder.
That you make a good point there, and one that I thought it seemed more like it was an innocent comment because he was recalling what was happening back then. And yet, palm trees was triggering the minute he said it. It's like, oh, now I have to sit up and listen. What's he talking about here? Because it was a very convoluted statement that in which he was reminiscing about the past. But you could make a case that yes, Sean McDermott and the Bills are trolling Kevin Adams, because what were the first words out of Sean McDermott's mouth on the tape in the locker room after the Jets game? Where would you rather be than right here, right now? And really, the Sabres can spin the whole press conference however they want, and that this was taken out of context, and this was taken out
Kevin Adams.
And yes, Kevin Adams.
John McDermott. Well, okay.
You're right. Kevin, thank you. But Kevin Adams should not have been in a position to be making excuses of any sort at the podium, because his message should have been, if you're about Buffalo, where would you rather be right now? I back this team. I back this town. I'm not going to make any excuses about where this team is at right now. We just need to be better. You don't come up with we don't have palm trees. We have taxes, and no matter how
it came off as him saying, even beyond the palm trees and the taxes part, it was, I haven't been able to figure out how to do this job.
It's his job. I
haven't been able to figure out how to overcome this stuff.
That's exactly what I'm saying. People in this town have, because this town, Buffalo, hasn't had palm trees in forever, and yet somehow people have won here. But I do the curiosity of how you phrase that, Tim, maybe makes me rethink my thoughts that this was an innocent comment. I still believe it was in some form, but you added some perspective to my thoughts. But I love it. I love it.
It's
I do
interesting to
too.
me though, now that, because I wasn't there Wednesday, but John, you're saying Sean McDermott did poke his head back in the media room later in the day, but it wasn't to
It
clarify
was
what he said. Now I'm being purely speculative. I wasn't there. Maybe you could fill us in, but it's almost like maybe he was poking his head back in to be like, "Hey, you guys remember that funny line I said earlier? What'd you think about that?"
I will tell you this. Well, there were some Bills employees, I'm not going to say who got a chuckle out of it, knowing the perspective of what was said downtown. Um, so who knows? But there was no pushback in if anybody was making comparisons between what Sean McDermott said on social media and making comparisons to the Sabres, there's no pushback from the Bills on how to interpret what that comment on how to interpret that comment. I'll say that.
I think what it says is that they didn't feel like they needed to. That when it was perceived that maybe there were points earlier in the season before the Houston game that Josh Allen had slighted Stephon Diggs, and I think there was something that Sean McDermott didn't say, but it got interpreted as a way that he was shading Stephon Diggs, and they had to double back on that and say that wasn't our intention, but that there really wasn't any feeling of responsibility that they had to come back on that for Kevin Adams. That at least at one's Bills drive, it was considered, hey, we can poke fun at Kevin Adams, and that's okay. We're not worried about that.
There was no pushback at all.
So you recall when a few years ago when I did the story about I guess 4 years ago, because it was right before COVID, or it was just as COVID was happening, the story I did on PSE and the toxicity of everything going on at the Sabres and PSE, and one of the loudest sentiments coming from the Bill side of the operation was, we don't want any of that Sabres stuff touching us. They had just gotten to the playoffs. They were doing well. It's like, look, we've figured things out over here. At least we're comfortable with the direction we're going. We don't want that shit bleeding over into our organization. And it's the same people, right? I mean, Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, I'm not saying they're, but the communications people and the executive vice presidents and most of the people are the same who had that sentiment back then that were telling me, we don't want whatever's happening in the Sabres. You take care of that shit. We don't want it. We don't want any. So that overlap, again, I'm not saying that it was intentional, but it does seem as though they had to have been aware, if it was unintentional, let's say for the sake of argument, it was unintentional, that over the next 2 or 3 hours, while Sean McDermott's out at practice, people know what it did turn into, and that there would have been an effort to say, all right, that's not
Right.
what, and they chose not to.
Nothing. Not
Let's
a whisper.
Let's talk college hoops. And I will maybe withdraw myself from this conversation a little bit because I really don't know. I will just set it up as to say, like I did at the beginning of the podcast, it is a dynamic that has changed over the years. It used to be the Associated Press would cover, more college basketball games, but then there came a point where it was top 25 only, whether it be the opponent coming to visit or if your team is top 25, like when UB under Bobby Hurley or Nate Oates, St. Bonaventure at various times over the past 25 years or so. So here we have the Associated Press's John Wawrow, who needs to monitor how good these teams are for logistical purposes, let alone for professional curiosity, but for logistical purposes. And Jonah Bronstein, who will be covering a lot of these games for you at the Associated Press, where is the Big Four, men and women, when it comes to encroaching on top 25 caliber status? And namely right now, St. Bonaventure at 13-1, after a very impressive win over VCU at the Riley Center. And UB women are now 12-0 with one Mid-American Conference victory under their belt as they're heading into conference play. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Jonah, the floor is yours. You've seen both teams.
Yeah, let me just mention we don't have to talk about it too much, but just to kind of mention Damon basketball, Division II, which is a different context, but they're number 3 in the country up to right now, number 1 in their region, and possibility if they keep that going that they will host NCAA tournament games this season. So they've been the best college basketball team in town this year.
Real quick, Jonah, on that, you had mentioned before we started recording here, they have a chance to get to number 1. Is there something within the scheduling that makes it so? Did they play
no,
do they play one of those teams coming up, or?
No, I just mean that they're one of four or five undefeated teams left in the country. I think it's more that the other teams have tougher conferences that maybe could play against Damon in that sense, but I think Damon has a better chance of remaining undefeated.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Or a good chance of remaining undefeated that some of the teams ahead of them don't have. And Damon does have a really challenging non-conference game coming up against Gannon. That was a Division II Final Four team last year. And if they win that game, I was out there yesterday talking to Coach Mike McDonald and wrote a story for WIVB.com. And the reason they're ranked as high as they are is because the other Division II coaches in this coaches poll, they know they've beaten 6 teams that were in the NCAA tournament last year. And if they beat Gannon, that will be 7. And they understand that they also beat UB, that they also had scrimmages against Army and Colgate where they did very well. The other Division II coaches know how good this Damon team is. And I think if Damon continues this undefeated run a few more weeks, they have an opportunity. They've been bumping up in that coaches poll every week. So I think that there's some consideration that they could be the number 1 team in the country if they remain undefeated. Back to the other teams, I'll start with the UB women because they're one of 7 undefeated teams left in women's basketball. I was out there on New Year's Day to watch them beat Central Michigan. They won by 26 points, which was their biggest MAC win in the 3 years under Becky Burke. And there was a tournament game previously, 4 years ago where they won by more points, but you have to go back, I think, 6-7 years for them to have a MAC regular season game where they won by that many points. They're beating the hell out of every team they play. They pretty much won, I think it's 11 or 10 of their 12 games have been by double figures, and the average margin is 23 or 24 points, and that held up in their first MAC game. Now they have their toughest MAC, one of their toughest games of the season, and one of their toughest MAC opponents coming up Saturday on the road against Kent State. That game will be on CBS Sports Network, which is the only national television game of the season for the UB women. If they can get through that game, remain undefeated, they have what might be perceived as easier games coming up after that for a few weeks. They have an opportunity to keep this undefeated start that's already the best start in school history, and they have a chance to keep that going. As far as being ranked in the top 25 and potentially being, having AP reporters at that game, the problem is they're a bottom 4 strength of schedule right now. According to some rankings, the numbers are a little different on different sites that you use. They played mostly home games. They didn't beat too many good teams in the non-conference play. Winning more MAC games will bump that figure up a little bit, but not a lot. And that's what's going to keep them out of at-large bid consideration later in the season and probably keep them out of the top 25. But I don't know if they get to 20-0, 21-0. I think voters will take that in consideration, and they're probably close to maybe getting votes.
My question for you, Jonah, because if I ever considered going to do a story on UB women's basketball, and I would love to, I'd love to have the time. I'd love covering college basketball, but the one question, I think the theme as I look back and as I follow that program, the one thing I look back to and the question I'd have would be, how has Becky turned this program around when it seemed like she wasn't going to be able to last her first season behind the bench because of all the players she lost, and there seemed to be a lot of infighting or there's a lot of things that were bubbling under the surface of that team in her first season. And is it just because she's recruited the people that she's comfortable with now? Is that what we're seeing?
Well, I think there's layers to that. I think Becky Burke probably learned from some of those. She wasn't a first-time coach, but it was her first year here at UB and first time coaching at this level, and some of the issues that they had. It was more after the season. They had a solid first season, especially they finished really well. And I think as far as her coaching in season, she's done a good job all 3 years and better each year. And that first year wasn't so bad with having lost the whole roster in the transfer portal and having to take over for Felicia Legette-Jack and not turning it around right away, but turning it around in the second half of that season and finishing, I think, above 500 at the end. But then they lost the whole recruiting class and the whole coaching staff, and it seemed to be a messy situation. But really, what happened is they got a really good coaching staff in the second crack at it. J.C. Brooks is the associate head coach. She had been the head coach down at Colgate. She played at Buffalo State. She's really well respected in local basketball and within the state. I mean, I think she has an opportunity to be the next head coach at UB if Becky Burke were to be able to move on to a higher level job at some point. If you go to their games, it looks like they have two head coaches. They're both standing and on the floor a lot of the time. I think she's been involved in recruiting and coaching, and she's very involved in scouting reports and getting this team ready. They have another local coach, James Ewing, who's Claudia Ewing's nephew, and he played basketball at O'Hara and played Division II basketball. He was on Mike McDonald's staff coaching over there a couple of years ago, and he moved over to women's basketball, was coaching with Damon, was on the St. Bonaventure staff for a year, then joined UB. I think he has a really good rap with the players, and he's, I think, helpful in their recruiting, and they've just gotten really good players. They lost the whole recruiting class, and they replaced them with recruits that were just as good, if not better, and they lost the whole assistant coaching staff and maybe replaced them with assistant coaches that were as good or better. And you saw it last year. Last year was another year where they got better as the season went along and got to the MAC championship game in the end, but didn't start so great. And the final record wasn't, the best, but now they're undefeated. They started the season well, and if they keep getting better as they had in previous seasons, they can have a really kind of memorable season in the end here.
Felicia Legette-Jack is not having a very good 2024-2025 season. They went to the tournament last year. She won 20 games each of her first two seasons at Syracuse. They're 6-7 now with their wins over teams like Niagara, Fairleigh Dickinson, Yale, Binghamton. They are in last place in in their conference right now, which is a bit surprising. But anyways, that's not.
Yeah, what seems to have been the case there is they were pretty good in the first few years that she was at Syracuse, with a lot of their best players being players that transferred in from UB or players that they had recruited to UB and then took with them as recruits. And they seem to have struggled to recruit in year 3 and year 4 without having these players that you would think maybe weren't ACC caliber players because they were recruited to Buffalo, but they were. And now Deasia Fair's out of that program, and without the players they brought, the program that they brought from Buffalo, they haven't been able to replenish as well in the ACC.
And Bana, I mean, I'm not sure how much more you can say about Mark Schmidt. I mean, what he's done there it's been a remarkable job, and why he's still there and not gone on to a bigger program, be it Pitt, looked at him. I know the Boston colleges universities looked at him and never got hired, but he keeps churning out winners there in St. Bonaventure and Little Olean, or Allegheny, or whatever you want to call it. It's Olean in the AP. It's Olean because it is the big. That's the dateline for the AP when we go cover St. Bonaventure.
We spent 20 minutes on that last week.
It's Olean.
I don't know.
It really, and I had a long discussion with an editor back when the Bonnies were ranked a couple of years back. And I said it should be, what is it, Allegheny, or technically it's St. Bonaventure, but there are a lot of colleges around this nation that actually, I believe Notre Dame has a Notre Dame, if I'm not mistaken. That's where their address is, Notre Dame, and their dateline is the city, the nearest center that they are. not a made-up place. St. Bonaventure,
Allegheny's not a made-up place.
it's not a made-up place, but you look at St. Bonaventure's address, it's not even Allegheny.
Hmm.
It's
Who
St.
knew?
Bonaventure. It's St. Bonaventure, New York.
Your colleague Steve Wine for years argued that the Dolphins games were played in Miami. And it wasn't until Steve left the beat that it changed to
True.
Miami Gardens, which it should have been all along.
Yes, that's correct. And I mean, we changed the date line for the League World Series. It used to be Williamsport for forever, but it's officially. I've been there. I've covered it. It's in South Williamsport, not Williamsport, and so that was changed. But when it comes to Allegheny or Olean, or because it is Olean and it's not going to change. So because St. Bonaventure actually considers itself St. Bonaventure, New York, no matter what the zip code is. I'm sorry if I hit some.
This was already litigated last week, John.
Okay, that's fine. Good. But Mark Smith,
we had no answer.
What else can you say about the guy?
We didn't have an answer.
It's
funny because we got into it and we were looking up, and AP Style Guide does not say anything about post office boxes, or I shouldn't say zip codes.
Right.
That's where the zip code comes from. It's St. Bonaventure has its own zip code, but that doesn't necessarily make it incorporated or have its own place. Like you say, Notre Dame, St. Bonaventure, if you have a zip code, that doesn't mean that's the date line, but
Correct.
There's no instruction in the AP Style Guide as to say what your date line should be based on, whether it be an incorporated area or whatever. It seems like it should be more defined. The Athletic and the New York Times, I looked up ours and we are equally undefined.
Well, there you go.
All right, let's wrap this shit up.
Well, let me just say, I do think it's good that John's brushing up on the Olean Dateline style points, because I think it's closer to having that team ranked. They're already getting votes. If you count it out, they're about 45th in the country in the AP poll, 53 in the net rankings, things like that. But the Atlantic 10's a strong league. VCU was the preseason favorite. They're going to be playing other good teams and more opportunities to boost that strength of schedule. There's probably a couple more weeks where they need to be a one-loss team before they get into that, actually into the top 25. But the opportunity's there. And I think I said earlier that UB was one of 12. UB women were one of 12 unbeaten teams. That's actually 7. But the number with Bonnet is they're one of 12 teams with 1 or fewer losses. And as that number starts to dwindle, if they're 13-1 now, if you go a couple weeks, they're 15-1, 17-1. I think it's going to be harder and harder to keep them out of that top 25 and beating good teams and looking maybe better and better on the power rankings as their record boosts up. Maybe they need some blowout wins to push some of those victory margins and things like that a little bit higher. But also, you look at their schedule as far as AP and AP coverage. Dayton's a team that's been in the top 25 this year and is just, kind of outside the top 25 getting votes right now. January 28th, they come to Bona. If Bona keeps winning, they could be 20-1 that game. I think they'd maybe be ranked if they're 20-1 going into that game. And possibility Dayton could be ranked for that game. So you could have 2 top 25 Atlantic teams playing in Olean / Allegheny.
You're going to both need to go down and cover it.
Yes. Well, we've done it before.
And one thing, whether they're top 25 or not, I'm seeing more and more bracketology that has St. Bonaventure in along with Damon as an 11 or 12 seed. So they do seem to be pushing into that top 40.
You're talking Dayton.
Well, Dayton is the team that people put in as the, winning the MAC tournament. It's always going to be an Atlantic 10 team in a bracketology that wins the tournament. But as the second bid in the league, Bona is getting that love in a lot of the bracketology around an 11 or 12 seed. And I think that's what matters a lot more. I tongue-in-cheek said before the season that it was NIT or bust for Bona because of the way last season ended and the controversy about that. They're definitely a team that's probably going to be in the NIT if they don't make the NCAA tournament, but now they're shaping up to potentially be an NCAA tournament team and also a team that's good enough to contend for the Atlantic 10 tournament title and make the NCAAs, the old-fashioned way.
All right, boys. Thanks for a hearty episode. We covered a lot of territory for an irrelevant hockey team and a football team that's entering an irrelevant game. And
We have a football team playing a relevant game tomorrow too.
UB.
UB down at the Bahamas
UB in
Bowl
the
against
bowl.
Liberty, and they're favored now. They opened as about a 3-point underdog, I think, and now I think they're favored. I don't know by how many points, but because of the opt-outs and transfers that Liberty has had, and UB has not really had any as far as key players and starters, and they seem like a team that's more together and more committed to winning this bowl game, and it would get UB to 9 wins for the third time in school history and the second time as a Division I program, and really cement this turnaround they've had in the first season under Pete Lembo.
What network is that on? Do we know? Is that ESPN?
ESPN2.
ESPN2. Okay.
11 a.m. So set your alarm, Tim.
That might be just getting home around then.
Ha!
I might have drinks with John Wawrow tonight.
That could happen. Rumor has it.
What did you guys think? Did you see this news from the Surgeon General today?
I did. I mean, is that breaking news? I don't know.
I think it was a big news story, but
I saw that. I'm like, didn't we know this already? It's that alcohol is the third most frequent cause of cancer or whatever, however they word that, after smoking. And what was the other one? Huff and paint. I don't know. What was it? There was the second
working for newspapers.
Oh, I have the triple.
I can't remember what the second one was.
Obesity.
Asbestos. I don't know.
I think it was being heavy.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Obese. John. Drinking, smoking, obesity. I have only 2 of those. Mathematically speaking. Jonah, you're looking thin, by the way. How many pounds are you down from your all-time high?
About 50.
Nice.
That's impressive. That is impressive. Congratulations on that.
Well, I appreciate it. I actually haven't been drinking in a couple months. I'm looking forward to maybe, violating the Surgeon General advice and having some beers sooner or later. But for some various reasons, I took a couple months off from that.
Good.
John Wawrow and I are going to be at Elmo's tonight.
I've become quite the connoisseur of non-alcoholic beers.
What's good and what's bad?
Well, there's a brand called Athletic that I don't know if was bought by the New York Times or not, but they make a lot of different varieties that are pretty good. And some of the ones like, everybody, Budweiser makes one, Labatt makes one. Those are kind of hit or miss, but most of the non-alcoholic beers that I order and drink taste similar to, the alcoholic version of them. You don't have the same bite to them, and obviously you don't get drunk, but there's a really good placebo effect. You can kind of fool yourself into thinking you're drinking that beer, that Heineken or that Budweiser, but it's the non-alcoholic version. And they go down like water, though. Like chugging those beers are much easier than an alcoholic drink.
And in 10 years, the Surgeon General will come out and say those could be cancer-causing.
Yeah, maybe they will. That would be disappointing.
It's not the alcohol, Jonah. It's the barley.
Yeah, the hops. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks to everybody for listening or watching, whatever you do with Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. Please subscribe, like, comment, do all the things. We get a lot of comments. We had some comments last week. I'm sorry to the commenter if he's still on right now, but told us to stop talking about college basketball. Well, he wants to hear more Russ Brandon or Buddy Nix stories, I think, or Pagulas, whatever. He had 2 guys. It was Russ. He wanted to hear more war tales. I get it. I think we told some good ones today. We gave our thoughts about Sean McDermott's palm trees.
Yes.
All right, guys, thanks for this. Thanks to everybody out there for checking out Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants.
The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.